Caldwell Counseling Center. Dan has been in the field for 11 plus years. I've known him personally the last 2. Really enjoyed working with him, learn from him every time we're together. Wealth of information. Did work in clinical as well as business development with the park back in the day, Memorial Hermann. Has been in private practice as LCDC-CCS LPC associate. I'm going to let him explain some of that, what all that is. He does a much better job of explaining himself than I do. But Dan's also interventionist, private practice, as I mentioned, and works as, I'm going to say it wrong, adjunct professor at Lone Star and University of St. Thomas. Like I said, I've really enjoyed working with Dan. We've had some shared cases together. He's thorough, he's great. He really cares about the patient, and that the patient's getting what they need. So that's everything I have to say about Mr. Dan. Dan, it's all yours, passing the torch.
That's so kind, thank you. Eric, I'm gonna come back to you. Did you want to pray first before we move on, or?
I would love to.
Let's
Technical glitch there, but I'm back. And yes, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for bringing Dan today to speak on this wonderful topic of ethics. And thank you for getting all these mental health professionals and our friends in the industry all across Texas to learn and to get together and just join up so that we can be your hands and help people that are struggling with mental health and addiction. Please be with people that are struggling right now with COVID and cancer and other diseases. Give them comfort and strength. And thank you for this holiday season and all your blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. So yeah, Kim, it's I appreciate you guys having me. Like you said, we've known each other for some time, and I've enjoyed our time working together as well. So a few things. I'm pretty blessed to be sitting where I'm sitting. For the longest time, I was a counselor at a facility, and I enjoyed my time there as well. But branching out over the last year and a half has been just unbelievable. I was talking with the guy most of us probably know, named Glenn Hadley, and we were talking before I went on his show, and I was like, man, I love the intervention work so much. I would probably give up my practice to do that full time. Then I'm like, well, no, I really love that practice a lot. It's my baby. Then I'm like, well, I really love the teaching so much though, that if I could do that full time, I'm like, I just enjoy all three so intensely. Like I'm really it's phenomenal where I'm at. So I just couldn't ask for anything better. So yeah, I'm a LCDC-CCS, Certified Clinical Supervisor in the state of Texas. That's just a fancy way to say I can train new interns through the state. I'm also a licensed professional counselor associate, which is the new fancy term for intern. But associate sounds so much nicer. I'm a nationally certified intervention professional as well. So, all those things are good. At the end of the day, I'm just another professional trying to make a difference. So, all good. I guess we just jump right in then, yeah? Why isn't it not moving?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I wanted to just say, please feel free to take part in the Q&A at the end for Dan. Any questions and concerns or anything you want to add in, just go to the Q&A or the chat, and we'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks, Dan. Sorry for interrupting.
Well, hey, no worries. Thank you. So this is on individualizing care. Originally, the topic was after SUD treatment, but it's really just in general, right? And I've done this presentation twice, and I wanted it to be an ethics presentation because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. I'm not here to educate you on addiction, because if you're here, you probably are pretty educated on what that looks like, right? But I am here to challenge you to look at your beliefs and to question some things about why we believe what we believe, or really to step outside of what, quote, I know works, and do what works for our clients, right? And sometimes those two things can meet at a crossroads. And, sometimes sometimes I have found myself, well, I know what works in this situation. And, so that's all that this is about. So remember this, and I think it was 2000, I don't know, 14 or 15, when this dress came across the internet, right? And it was just one picture. And to me, I'll tell you, to this day, it was a blue and black dress, right? But everybody saw it two different ways. My wife swore it was gold and white. Which one of us is right? Like, I will die by the fact that dress was blue and black. And she says the same thing. So if we're really all, if we're both right, like who, what do you do, right? So really, I want to challenge you on just what your view of individual addiction care looks like, right? So I found this interesting, where the word addiction even comes from, and it's derived from the Latin term for enslaved or bound to. That's pretty fitting. I got a kick out of that. So here are some definitions, and I'm going to try to move this thing around. Look at that. I found this interesting when I really started looking, right, at some definitions for substance use disorder. And I found from ASAM, which everybody loves ASAM, a treatable chronic medical disease, right? Moving down to NIDA, a chronic relapsing disorder. The APA, a complex condition. Well, yeah, that's pretty reasonable. A brain disease, right? SAMHSA, who we all love, says it's recurrent use that causes impairment in several areas of our life. The Mayo Clinic, a disease that affects a person's brain and behavior, right? The DSM, a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and psychological symptoms. The dictionary, as you can read this, what I'm getting to with all these is while they're similar, they're very different, right? So if we can't even get on the same page with what this is, how do we treat it, right? We all have an opinion of what it is. We all have bits of research we draw from and say, well, this fits my narrative of what I like. So, right? Because look here, watch this. The definition of an island is the same across the board. It's not, there's no room for mistake. It's an island. It's a piece of land surrounded by water, body of land surrounded by water, tract of land completely surrounded by water, right? And they're all the same. And in the pictures, while I'd like to be on number 1 or number 2 anytime, you see how very different they are, yet they're still all an island, right? I thought that was kind of interesting how those definitions just kind of fell into place there with that. This is one of my favorite slides in this whole presentation right here, right? Because which one of these looks like addiction? We'll go ahead and check the box on number 2. Like, you can just check the box. Like, that's not a secret. What about number 1 though? Well, number 3, the group of fancy looking professionals can't be, right? 4, the young man graduating. 7, the lady who's into fitness. She knows what she's putting into her body, right? She's very careful about that. 5, the lady on the beach with the baby. Certainly not. 6, I mean, dude does have dreaded beard, right? And tatted up. He's playing bass for a band called Five Finger Death Punch. You tell me, I don't know. I might make that assumption. 10, young guy tatted up. Number 9, I don't know who that handsome fella is, man, but he looks like he's having a good time. I'll tell you that was me at about 20, and my life was a disaster under that smile. But number 8, the couple with the Bible in the meadow, because I always go to the meadow to read the Bible, and just it fascinates me, right? All that said, I'd like to say something about this dude right here at Five Finger Death Punch. He's 3 years sober. So number 8, the people at church, it reminds me of a dude I worked with, great dude, had a cocaine problem. And he said, well, Dan, I'm not going to do AA. I said, great. What are you going to do? I'm not going to do SMART. Great. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to go to church. Great. But let me remind you where you were getting your cocaine from. Was your buddy at church. So like, you just can't, all my point is none of this matters, right? Like, nobody knows. This thing doesn't discriminate. It can be any of these. I've worked with some of all of these kinds of people, right? And it just doesn't discriminate here, right? So I believe in the Biocycle social model. I believe that genetics definitely play a role. I think research supports that. But the psychology and the socio-environmental aspect is huge, and I'm going to point that out. And I love these. I was fascinated with these circles. I get squirrel, right? Like, but these things, they overlap, and it indicates such a unique perspective of how these things do overlap with each other, right? So this is interesting, and I'm not going to bore you with all of these things because most of us know this, but this addiction, as we call it, creates a perfect storm, right, in the brain. It hijacks our reward system, and then it's associated with our memory and our emotion, and then it creates problems with stress regulation. Imagine that, right? So our biological factors certainly make a difference when you're talking about our gender, our age, our ethnicity, the state of development, meaning how early we started using, each person's unique physiology, mental health, and sensitivity to drugs, all of that makes a difference. So if all of that is so different for each of us, how do we treat it the same? I don't, maybe we do. I don't know. I'm saying it's something to really consider though, right? So as I have some friends in my pocket over here, as I mentioned a minute ago, studies show that genetics make up a significant amount of determining who becomes addicted and who doesn't, right? Because so many of us start out as rite of passage type thing in junior high or high school or whatever, and nobody sets out to be addicted, right? We do what people do, and then at some point, due to these things, our genetics, our psychology, our socio-environmental impacts, it really, nobody knows who becomes one and who doesn't. It's really quite fascinating, and the research is really in its infancy still. So you look at the psychological opponent, right? Of course, we know trauma-informed care is super huge with people with substance use. Some of the studies show that 75% of people with substance use issues have some kind of trauma. That's pretty significant. And one thing when I'm working with my clients and they say, well, I don't really have this trauma, and it's fun to explain to them. I say fun, it's my idea of fun, I guess. It's where I'm at these days. But it says, is if I'm two of us are in a car accident in the same car, right? I could get out and be completely traumatized. Like, I don't want to drive anymore. I'm scared to death. And the other person could get out and be like, suck it up, buttercup. It was a fender bender, right? But the reality is that's still traumatic for me. So it's an experience rather than an event. And, if you've never read the book, The Body Keeps Score, do so. It's phenomenal. So if our psychological factors affect our perception, our motivation, our learning, and our beliefs and attitudes, what about this? This is my life in a nutshell right here. It took me hours just for the record to put this piece together. This is why I don't do these, because I'll spend hours on one of these slides, right? But this is the socio-environmental piece. And so some of us like to say biopsychosocial, spiritual. I included the spiritual in this piece, right? Because that absolutely plays a role as well, right? But if you look at these things, these are things that impacted my life in particular, right? And that continue to do so today. So marketers are geniuses, man. Absolute geniuses. You see I forgot there's a pointer on here. This thing's so cool. I just learned this recently, but this pumpkin right here with drinking alcohol, right? This meme of Willy Wonka saying you must be on a much higher plane than me if you don't drink, right? But let's look at the socio-environmental goes much deeper than our family of origin, than our friends. What about our political views in this heated climate, right? Different than it's ever been. What about Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ or vegan or Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby and all these things, right? Religion and spirituality, social media, world events, right? Our goals, the news media, our attachment. I have a picture here of a helicopter from a Vietnam era. And the reason that's on there for me is because I've read research that shows trauma can be passed down to 4 generations. That's fascinating to me, right? Well, my father was a Vietnam veteran that got shot up, and he was an angry, angry dude. That said, he suffered some traumas that I can't even imagine. And so that's probably passed down. What about, guys in the recent wars? Or what about just now with the mask stuff? Look at the advertising for vaping. You remember Joe Camel from the 90s, some of you that were older. that wasn't advertising to me as a grown-up. That was specific advertising to kids, right? Because a grown-up doesn't care about a camel smoking cigarettes, right? Look at the ads for the old cool cigarettes, how fancy she looks, and the vape, how colorful it is. And that's for kids. That's what that's for. Marketers are geniuses, right? Look at the jump man here, who everybody knows, Mike Jordan, right? Advertising is what I'm getting to in all of this is it affects, we make these associations early on. K Diamonds is the one that just sticks in my craw, because it tells me from early on that if every kiss begins with K and it also begins with diamonds, right? So if I'm broke, I don't get either, I guess, right? But for everybody else in the world, right? So those kinds of things really affect people, the neighborhood we grow up in, all of these things. And I remember this, like, so if we all perceive things different, and if our psychological factors impact our beliefs, our attitudes, our perception, our motivation, then how can all of this be the same for everybody? It can't, right? We're all so unique and so different. And how we look at these things and take these things in, right? So then I thought this one was pretty interesting, a pretty interesting correlation between what we have today. See, I didn't have this growing up. I remember first getting on Facebook, I don't know, 2007, 8, 9, somewhere back in that time frame. And I'd lived in Alaska in the late 80s. And I remember, you hook up with all the old friends you never thought you'd see again, and talking to this friend in Alaska, and I was just thinking, this is the weirdest thing right now. Like, we're even communicating over this computer, right? Like, it was so bizarre. But now here we are. You see how this relates? I just thought it was so fascinating. Anyway, I don't know what it has to do with this presentation, but I liked it. So nature or nurture, right? Big debate in school. I think we all know now it's both. It's not one or the other. I think it's both, but either way, it's your parents' fault. That's pretty funny, but kind of true, right? So I was kind of joking with Kim and Eric a little before the presentation. I was like, man, I got the dude from Five Finger Death Punch in here. I got Paul Stanley in here. Like, who does that, right? But this is fascinating, and this may be an argument more for genetics, but if you read this little excerpt from his book, he talks about having this, I forget exactly what it was called, it may be on here, but he had this deformed ear, right? And that's why he started to grow his hair long, as you can see in this top picture from the 60s, right, to cover his ear. And he was so self-conscious of it and worried about it, and people making fun of him. They called him Stanley the one-eared monster. And he decided to, rather than use drugs and do those things, he created this character in this band. And he said when he was up on stage, all of that went away, but he didn't have the nurture, right? And the nature piece wasn't very kind either, right? But he didn't use drugs. I'm not going to say the man never used a drug. I'm just saying he didn't become addicted, right? So it's fascinating to me how someone can who does and who doesn't and why, right? And I'm still waiting on that research to be a little bit more precise, and that's could be a long time coming. Who knows if they'll ever even figure that out, right? But again, just kind of to recap the biocycle social piece is all of these things overlap, right? And one leads to the other, and one affects the other, and it's pretty interesting to see this kind of all jumbled up right here, and how one really does affect the other. And every one of us are different here. It's interesting when we put perceptions in here, and coping skills and attitudes and beliefs. And I'm reminded of two ladies I worked with, and when I was in an IOP counselor, and the two couldn't have been more different, right? One was kind of well put together, and one was the opposite of that. And one would run for 3 hours a day and work out and spend hours, apparently, like doing makeup and things. And the other one just was less than that, right? Didn't care about all that. But she would get so pissed at the other girl and think, well, man, she just thinks she's perfect. What she didn't know was the reason that other lady was doing all those things is because of how insecure she was. And it's just an interesting dynamic how our perceptions really do make a difference. And the two didn't care for each other, but it was because they just didn't know, right? I couldn't divulge that information, obviously, as a clinician and group, but it was an interesting dynamic to watch take place. You know, you don't really know what someone's going through with that stuff. So if it doesn't, this is my favorite slide. I know I've said that before. I'll probably say it 3 more times. This is truly my favorite slide. I love me some Judge Judy, man. But if it doesn't make sense, then it's probably not true. And in most cases, like when I'm talking to my family, yeah, this applies, right? But when I'm talking to a client, it still applies somewhat. But when you're looking at all this, it may not make sense to me in my rational lens, but what about the lens they're looking through? It may absolutely make sense to them, right? So now what? Like we got this addiction thing. We figured out there's a lot to it, right? It's not just one thing. Do we do traditional treatment? We medicated assisted treatment, just therapy, psychiatry. There's lots of movement towards case managers now outside of treatment. Maybe we send them to 12-step groups, smart recovery, other recovery groups, church. Maybe they should just stop. Like maybe all of those things work for certain people, right? If we're lying to ourselves to say people don't just stop sometimes, right? Now they may be the anomaly, but that happens. Right. And I hesitate to have that conversation because then everybody that hears that's like, well, I'm going to be that person. Well, Scooter, your history kind of shows us that that's not really the case. So what is recovery, right? We say I'm in recovery. I'm doing recovery. Go be in recovery. You can be sober and not be in recovery. Like what is it? What is recovery? Well, AA tells me it's mind, body, and spirit. Right. And then they tell me people, places, and things. So I thought the environment was probably pretty important there, right? I kind of buy into this because what does it do? It matches the biocycle social that I believe in. Pretty good, right? I like that a lot, actually. So here's some definitions because I like definitions. Again, ASAM. It's a active process of continual growth that addresses biological, psychological, and social. I gotta move this thing, sorry. I can't move it. There it goes. And social and spiritual disturbances, right? I like that one. And SAMHSA says, well, it's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness. I like that. Different, but I like it. Oh, now we got something that's the same. NIDA says recovery is a change through which people improve their health and wellness. Oh, but wait a minute. Then it goes on to say, just kidding, that's called being in remission. Being in recovery is when those who make positive changes become, and you can read all that, but you see they're still different. Betty Ford calls it, in an article I read, calls it a working definition. Anytime there's a, quote, working definition, that always makes me laugh, but it's different than the rest. The Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment. Ubiquitous, by the way, is a great word, is a concept that remains poorly understood and ill-defined. Simple as Google, a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. The dictionary says process of combating a disorder such as alcoholism. None of those are the same. Very similar, but none of them are the same. So my definition is any positive lifestyle changes with the absence of consequences from mood-altering chemical substances. So with very different definitions, how do we treat that? It fascinates me that we can't again get on the same page. Remember the island? Like it's all the same definitions, while yet they're very different in how they look. I just find that so fascinating. So what defines an individual? Is it addiction? Is it recovery? What about my family, friends, career, education, likes, dislikes, etc.? So normally here I have a pizza because I like pizza. Everybody likes pizza. Most everybody likes pizza. And I like to use, I thought this looked a little more professional. So, but the idea is each slice can be something that is a part of, that makes up the whole, right? I am not defined by my addiction any more than I'm defined by my recovery. I don't meet people today and jam out my hand and be like, hey, I'm Dan, I'm a dope fiend. Hey, I'm Dan, I'm an alcoholic. Or hey, I'm Dan, I'm this drug counselor, right? All of which make up Dan. I just say, hey, I'm Dan, nice to meet you, right? Because none of that defines me. Now, that said, you hear people say, well, anything you put above your recovery, you're probably going to lose at some point. Maybe, possibly. The odds are good. But where does that leave the people who don't lose everything? Then they say, well, I can't have that problem. So for me, back to the pizza analogy, is that while I can have as many slices as I want that make up the whole, it's that cheese that holds it all together, right? And for me, that's my recovery, right? That's the piece I call, quote, recovery. And in the beginning, recovery is learning new skills and different ways to cope with things. At some point, that just becomes life stuff for me. It's no longer this recovery stuff. It's just life stuff, stress management, anger management, and managing my anxiety, taking care of my mental health, all of those pieces, right? So that I can live up to my fullest potential in all of these areas. It gets pretty derailed quick without that recovery piece, but it doesn't define me. It just doesn't, and I don't think it should. So, Viktor Frankl, we all know who that is, and for the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at that given moment. Dude, I love that. Like, think about that for a minute. Like, what I believe, I tell people often that, so it's funny, when I started in my recovery journey, that, my first prayers were simply, God help me, because I didn't really buy in and I don't know that I wanted to buy in, because if I was this child made in the image of God, why would he let me live this way? Right? I was miserable inside for 25 years of my life. Couldn't figure it out. Woke up, wanted to die at night, woke up angry that I didn't. So where is this God, right? I didn't have a purpose in my life. I didn't have meaning in my life. Little did I know that was my plan, was to use those experiences. Now they're my greatest asset, right? But that said, if I'm doing the same thing in that first 6 months, 11 years later, I probably need to grow a little bit and move past that, right? So my meaning changes. It's fluid, right? It changes to where I'm at. I should be able to open my perspective to new things. I just love that so much. I really love Viktor Frankl, and that just speaks to me. So we have this theory that works more than it doesn't. I'll say that. That's why it's got the approved stamp there. Is, typical treatment looks like something like this: detox, residential, followed by PHP, sober living, 12-step group, followed by IOP, psychiatry where needed, addictionologist, if you will, sober living, 12-step group, followed by aftercare, sober living, on and on and on, with therapy mixed in. I think that's a winning combination for most people, right? But what happens when it's not? Kim and I just recently experienced this as well. And it happens, and it's not a knock on any place or any person. It's just sometimes some things are not a good fit for that person, for where they're at that moment, right? And we have to all adjust and do what we can do there. But I think this is a fairly good formula for it works more than it doesn't for most people, right? And there's some great professionals out there that have sober living homes, and there's some great MDs, and there's some great therapists. I have resources for all of that. And I think that's an important piece to what I do is have resources, right? One of the best things I did, and it came about unexpectedly, was market at the park, right? Become a business development person at the park, because it allowed me to meet so many other professionals and really get to know them and see what they're about. And, I think that's our ethical responsibility to do that. I know we're busy, and I know, it's hard to get out of the office, and it's, I only knew a piece about everywhere I knew until I got that out of that office and was able to go tour these places and talk to the people. And that's when it really opened my eyes up to, what they really truly do. So then there's this, not very much to choose from. I'm kind of kidding, of course. Like, do you want to go to Celebrate Recovery? It's not for everybody. Marijuana Anonymous, like, who knew? right? I sent a couple of guys there a few years ago to this, it doesn't matter which one, but I sent them to one, and they came back and I was like, how was it? And they were like, well, and I quote, it was some old guy that wanted to know how the weed was today. So, you know, it's hit or miss. Probably don't go back to that one. Just saying. But, you know, there's refuge recovery. There's CODA. There's obviously CMA, CA, there, Women for Sobriety. There's just so many options. SLAA, smart recovery. You know, find your fit. And in AA alone, or in 12-step work alone, there's so many different groups that you'll find one for yourself, I'm sure. So then there's this dude, Craig Beck. I read this book, love this guy. Alcohol lied to me. Yeah, I agree with that. But he says his method's unique. No need to declare yourself an alcoholic. I already like it. Permanent cure, not a lifetime struggle. Sign me up. No groups, meetings, or my favorite, expensive rehabs. Wait, what? Treats the source of the problem, not the symptoms. The rest of us are stupid, apparently. So that said, I'm kind of kidding, but he uses the word cured in the book. And now my first initial reaction was that's reckless, like, right? However, if I go back to think, well, there are those people that can stop, right? That may not have the genetic problem or a number of reasons. That's probably this crowd, but he does make some great points in here. And he says, we make associations with alcohol when we're children. We don't know that cousin Larry over here's life's falling apart. We see him at the family barbecue drinking, having a good time, right? Well, I can't even process what that means. Go back to when I showed you my life on the socio-environmental tab there, that it was our slide, that it was, you know, advertisers tell us, you know, alcohol is how you celebrate. Alcohol is how you mourn. Alcohol is, you know, where the party is. And it just, so we make these associations, and let's call it what it is. It's first, he says, let's identify that it's a poison, right? Made from rotting fruits and vegetables. It's not this magic, you know, stress relief. No, it's a poison that causes me more anxiety and more stress than I use it. The book's worth a read. You know, if you can take some nuggets out of it, I'm for it. I don't know how much stock I put into the whole thing, you know, but it's interesting, I'll say the least. So then this brings me to here is an individual in recovery, if that individual is taking some box on this, seems to be a hot button topic. Look, I have professionals that I work with closely that I highly respect, but will tell me no, I don't believe in that. And I'm not here to tell someone how to believe, right? That's their take. What about methadone? Are they in recovery if they smoke marijuana? What if they have an occasional drink? Now, on the surface, that's like, well, heck no, right? But in each individual's life, what if they're drinking, you know, a bottle of vodka a day and they've cut down to 3 beers? Is that a recovery? I mean, you know, everybody's got an opinion here. Does an individual have to practice abstinence to be in recovery? And I know this gets everybody worked up right here. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying these are things we have to really consider. And you know, one of the things I like to point out is, what do you have if you sober up a car thief? Sober car thief. So in essence, this quote recovery becomes about behaviors, right? AA tells me practice honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, right? I like gratitude, except I like all of these things, right? I can go on and on. So it reminds me of Tim Duncan. For those that don't know Tim Duncan, he was a member of the San Antonio Spurs, basketball player, right? He was, his nickname was the big fundamental, because he wasn't flashy like Jordan or Kobe or LeBron, right? But he won 5 rings and he was good at what he did. One of the top 10, arguably, basketball players to play the game, because he practiced the fundamentals. And for me, that's what I have to have my clients return to. That's what I return to, regardless of what they're doing or how they're doing it, as long as they're doing it, but practice the fundamentals of basic recovery. You know, I learned early on as a therapist, I was told I couldn't mix this and do that and had to have this unique theoretical orientation. And okay, I buy that. But all of these work together very well. And I use them all the time. So it's funny to me that I still hear some people say that, right? But to each their own. So, you know, 12-step work, they say, trust in us, higher power, gratitude, acceptance, work with others. Smart recovery tells you, no, you're empowered, challenge your beliefs, get some support, you'll be rewarded, right? Christianity, trust God, love thy neighbor, practice acceptance, live by a set of principles, you'll be rewarded. Buddhism, live right, you'll be rewarded. Psychology, practice mindfulness, gratitude, acceptance, you'll be rewarded. We're all saying something very similar here, right? So whichever road you choose, it's okay, right? When are we going to stop doing this? Like, you notice there's cracks there for a reason. When somebody doesn't fit into the typical mold, they get labeled resistant. I can't stand that. Like, maybe they are, and maybe there's some people that are, but there's a lot that aren't, and their lens is different. It doesn't make them resistant, but we're trying to do this and make it work, and getting frustrated as clinicians when it doesn't. So, my slogan at my company is discover your pathway to recovery, because it could be different than mine. In fact, I'm sure it is, right? And I put this map of Houston because Houston has a great highway system. It's not intended for this many people. But it really, no matter which direction you go, there's one downtown, right? And we're all trying to get there, right? No matter which highway we take, we're all trying to get to the downtown there. So, lastly, I have a couple of things here, some of my favorite quotes and things. And out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's easy to let up on a spiritual plan of action and rest on our laurels. For if we do, alcohol is a subtle foe. We're not cured of alcoholism. We have a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition, which led me to make this poster in my office. I heard J.J. Watt say this. Turns out it's a dude named Rory Vaden. Success is never owned. It's only rented. The rent's due every day. The great Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, right? But keep moving forward. All those things say the same thing. I got to do something every single day for my recovery, right? And I put a shout out, thanks Lisa V, because she set my office up real nice. It looks all super cute and nice and professional. And yeah, I appreciate that. She works wonders there. So really, lastly, Nida asked, can addiction be treated successfully? Of course it can. It's a treatable disorder, right? Research on the science of addiction and treatment of substance use disorders has led to the development of research-based methods that help people stop using drugs and resume productive lives, also known as being in recovery. Boom, suckers. I love that. Anyway, I had to give a shout out to the whole office there, man, for Lisa for hooking it up. But that's it. That's, at the end of the day, my hope for you was not to educate you on anything new here, but challenge what you already know, right? Challenge your beliefs on why it's easy to say, nope, 12-step, this therapy, psychiatry. Take your time, know your resources out there, do your best to match your people with what fits them, right? And not what fits you. So, yeah.
All right. Wow. Thanks, Dan.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. I told you guys that every time I sit down with Dan, I learn something new. So today was a lot. Learned a lot. You're an incredible teacher. So thank you. We have a few things. I just wanted to comment that what I heard you say, and we hear it and say it a lot, but it's I personally am in recovery. I used the AA as got me sober, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. But in working in this field, my eyes have been open to the fact, because I was very set in that this is what works and this is what worked for me. But with my experience of working with others, I've learned that there are many pathways to recovery. There are, and I respect them all. As long as that individual's getting what, your definition of recovery, which I loved. As a matter of fact, I wanted to say, Mary Raspet, hopefully I'm saying that, Mary Raspet said that. She said she loved your definition of recovery. So thank you for that. Adrian Gibson wants to know, and tell us a little bit about it too. You referenced a book, Dan, and I didn't get the title of it. I know it had the word body in it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's called The Body Keeps Score. I believe, and forgive me for all the therapists watching, I think it's Bessel van der Kolk. I forget I could be wrong on the first name. Just look up van der Kolk, The Body Keeps Score. It's about trauma. It's very fascinating, and it's well, everybody that's in this industry should read it.
Okay.
Thank you,
And it's about
Delina, for posting that. I was struggling with the spelling, but
VANDERKOLK, I believe.
we got it. And well, I did have a lot of people reaching out that would like a copy of your presentation. If that's okay, we can post it on our website. So after we get this, and we'll also put the recording on our website, that is spiritualcarenet.org. And you can go there and see this presentation, as well as some of the other ones we've had in the last few months. So spiritualcarenet.org.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that, because there were several people asking questions about that. Also, I don't have any questions popping up right now. I think it's such a great job of explaining everything, but I'm just curious and would love to know, somebody else had mentioned, tell us a little bit more about your affiliation with teaching at Lone Star and St. Thomas. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, that's awesome. I love to talk about that. So Lone Star, I just was hired. I'll start in spring, but that one for me is full circle, because that's where I'll share this with you that I didn't graduate high school. I dropped out of school in the 10th grade. College was never in my future. God had other plans for me, apparently. And long story short, I was able to start at Lone Star in Montgomery, and that changed on the LCDC track. And those guys changed my life. And I always said I would love one day to get back there. But St. Thomas came first through a mutual colleague, and I just fell in love with it immediately. Like, I was talking with a colleague that most of us know named Leslie Downing, and her and I were just chatting it up, and we were talking about how amazing it is that we take for granted the information all of us know. Like, because when you're talking with these students, they don't know. They're new. Well, how would they know, right? We've been in the field for some time, and we just take for so much information we just know, like, and we take for granted. Like, I know if I have a lady who needs a sober living, I know who to call, right? I know I'll call you. Like, I know that if I have an adolescent that needs treatment, I know who to call. Like, you just take for granted, these things and these connections and these, just this basic information. So to be able to reach back to the very basics of what we do and pass that on, and watch these guys just get starstruck with, like, oh my God, I get this. Like, I teach a multicultural counseling course at University of St. Thomas. And one of my assignments was they had to interview someone from a different culture. And the idea is to look at their own biases, right? To step out, and they're like, I don't really have any bias. And I can remember saying the same thing, right? Like, of course we do, right? But the idea is therapists, or not even therapists, just people in this industry, no matter what you do, you work with everybody, right? And it's our ethical responsibility to self-assess. So I love it. I could go on and on about that, but I'll stop there. I love the teaching.
I can see why.
Yeah.
You're good at it.
Thank you.
That PowerPoint was on point. No pun intended. Good stuff. Interesting. And yeah, I appreciate it. So it looks like that's kind of everything we have as far as questions. It was, a lot of people are commenting. Excellent. Would love to have the notes at the beginning. We're seeing lots of that. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of that information back to some of these folks that have tuned in. Really grateful that you guys took some time out of your day to spend with us and Dan. And really grateful that you took the time out to do this for all of us. It was fascinating, well delivered. Blessed to know you. Eric, I'm going to pass it back to you, and you do what you do. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Whoops, I'm on mute. Thanks again, Kim, for co-hosting, and Dan for an excellent presentation. Sorry about the technical glitch in the beginning, but one thing I wanted to throw out, now the Spiritual Care Network, we have a membership program. And it's not very expensive. It's only $50 a year if you're one of Dan's students or a marketer or a faith leader. Now, if you do benefit from the CEUs that we provide, almost one a month, then we do have an $80 membership per year program. We also have corporate memberships available where you can get your logo on our website and on email blasts. So please go to our website and look for that at spiritualcarenet.org. And thank you to the rest of the board and everybody that's joining us today. And stay tuned for other great webinars coming up in the next few months. So that's all I have. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Y'all have a Merry Christmas.
Yes, you too, Eric.